Dr. Michael Harvey, PhD, ABPP, provides training and consultation on mental health issues having to do with hearing loss, including consultation and training for audiologists regarding motivational interviewing and the psychological aspects of patient care. As a clinical psychologist, he has a private practice in Framingham, I hope I pronounced that right, Massachusetts, and was a consultant faculty at Salus University, where he taught online courses relating to the psychosocial aspects of hearing loss. He has published over 50 articles in this field, and his latest books are called Listen with the Heart, Relationships and Hearing Loss, and The Odyssey of Hearing Loss, Tales of Triumph. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Michael Harvey. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, is this screen sharing working? Can everyone see this, my slide? Teresa, can you let me know?
I actually see a screen, but it's blank right now.
Okay, let's figure this out then. It says screen share. So
there we go. Now you just have to share the PowerPoint. Right now you're sharing, yeah.
Okay, so you can see that, right?
I can see, yes, I see all of us, and then I see.
You see it now?
No. Keep.
Now you see it somehow, right? Let's.
I see all of us. Did you try all the? It'll say on there on the presenting now.
Wait a minute.
Share now.
Let me fix this.
Okay, I don't have your PowerPoint, so I can't bring it up. But unless you, there we go. There we go. Thank you.
Okay. And now you
Wonderful.
should be able to see my screen, right?
Yes, thank you.
You can see it, right?
Yep, we sure can.
Okay, so let's begin finally. It's a pleasure to be here. And I will start with one of my favorite stories, that I was director of a clinic for, this is probably 1979, a while ago, for culturally deaf people who used American Sign Language. I used American Sign Language, and I was meeting with an adolescent female named Jill, my first hard of hearing client. She didn't have a profound hearing loss, she didn't sign, and she kept coming in week after week complaining that nobody understood her unique needs. And I kept saying, what do you mean? Let me tell you, you feel ostracized, you feel alienated, you don't get along with your parents. And we kept going round and round. And I have to admit to you, privately, I was saying to myself, what adolescent, or what adult for that matter, doesn't feel misunderstood by many, many people? And we were stuck. And later that week, Deaf Inc., where was my organization, we were putting on a conference for deaf and hard of hearing people. The brochure went out. A day later, the director of the Boston Guild for the Hard of Hearing calls me and says, "Hi, Mike, how are you?" "Fine, Kevin, how are you?" Something was off, but I kept going. "So we got your brochure about the conference for deaf and hard of hearing people. That's great, it looks good. Thank you, Kevin. So that's for hard of hearing people too, right, Mike?" "Of course, Kevin, that's what the brochure says. So I'm sure you have ALDs, right, Mike?" "Right, Kevin." "Well, it's good talking to you, Mike. It's good talking to you too, Kevin." We hung up the phone, and then I asked a hard of hearing colleague what an ALD was. And she explained to me all about assistive listening devices. And then I saw Jill again, and she once again complained about no one understanding her unique needs as a hard of hearing individual, but this time I got it. So I asked her to stand up and outstretch your arms and make one arm stretch toward the deaf community and the other arm stretch toward the hearing community and go back and forth. For the first time, she nodded her head and tears came to our eyes. And she described the phenomenon of being between two worlds. She was pulled toward the hearing world, but she couldn't understand what people were saying in dark and noisy environments. And she was being pulled toward the deaf world, and people made fun of her because she couldn't understand sign language. This theme is echoed by Holly Elliott, a deaf, hard of hearing woman, social worker. Hearing people often think I'm hearing because my speech is good. Deaf people often think I'm hearing because my signs are bad. We are caught between incomprehensible speech on the one hand and incomprehensible signs on the other. If only those hearers would talk more clearly. If only those deafies would sign more clearly. So progressive hearing loss carries a different kind of tone in terms of the grieving process. Because as one person put it, it'd be better if I just had hearing loss and it stayed that way so I can grieve and get it done with. I'm continually grieving and re-grieving because anytime I start to feel better, my hearing gets worse and down I go again. It's been a terrifying roller coaster. And then there's sudden, profound hearing loss. Just let me tell you one of my favorite stories. This is a story of Carol who was in a car accident and incurred a sudden, profound hearing loss. I had to take a year's leave of absence from college to recuperate. I was living at home with my parents, going to physical rehab and a host of doctors. I remember when it first really hit me on a deep, visceral level that I was deaf and I was going to be deaf forever. It was the middle of the night, about a year after I left the hospital. A terrible nightmare about suffocating in a plastic bag had just woken me up. My heart was pounding and my whole body was covered with sweat. Without any hesitation, I immediately went straight to my parents' room, like I was a little girl again. For a minute, I stopped in my tracks and stood there, noticing how soundly they were sleeping and how very peaceful they looked. But there was no question in my mind that they would want me to disturb all of that. So I shook them out of their sound, peaceful sleep, and I told them about my nightmare. We all knew what it meant. My mother held me. I felt her body spasm, and we both began to cry. She began to stroke my hair. My dad was sitting up in bed with one hand on my mom's shoulder and the other one on mine. He was crying too. I felt real close to both of them that night. It was the first time that we really allowed ourselves to openly feel and express with each other the pain and tragedy of what had happened. None of us got any more sleep that night. As the sun rose, my dad suggested we take a walk. I walked between my parents hand in hand, just like I used to do as a kid, along the same paths in the woods that we'd walked so many times before. The sun came up over the trees, through the mist, exposing the splendor of greens and other colors of the woods. Although I guess it may sound corny to you, it was an epiphany for me. We were quiet for a long time. My dad was the first one to break the silence. As we sat down on a triangularly arranged group of rocks, he said very gently and lovingly, "You know, Pumpkin," his pet name for me, "you'll get through this. You're going to have a full, happy, and very successful life, but not without some blood, sweat, and tears. You never have to shut us out from any of that." We all began to cry, and we sat there for a very long time. The mist was gone, and the sun by this time radiated through the trees. I think that moment was the closest I've ever felt to my mom and dad. It was then that I knew that everything would be okay. Maybe someday I'll be able to read that without tears coming to my eyes, but it hasn't happened yet. It's a very potent story. Let's go back to Jill, who was simultaneously being able to accept and lament her hearing loss. This is kind of a cool concept. I am both grateful for my hearing loss, she said, for the opportunities it has given me. I met some wonderful people, yet if there were a medical cure, I'd accept it in a heartbeat. I've accepted my loss and I still grieve. And there's a wonderful saying from a study that was done on the psychological development of adults. Wisdom is the ability to hold a paradox. As kids, is this or that, black or white, all or nothing. I'm happy, I'm sad. As adults, we know we can be both. She talks about one advantage of her profound deafness, a composer, Gabriella Frank. When I'm really under a deadline, I take off my hearing aids and stay in silence for a few days. In the absence of sound, my imagination goes to different places. It's a bit like being in a dream when unusual and often impossible events come together, the perfect place from which to compose. So this idea of paradox, you can see things in one of two ways and both are right. Some of you may see two people looking at each other. Others of you may see a vase. This is called the Rubin vase. And it's used to illustrate a social psychology concept called integrative complexity, that there's more than one way to look at something and all are legitimate. I am grateful for what I also grieve, right? Okay, why isn't my slide moving? Okay. So this is one of my favorite quotes about grief. Grief is like an ocean. It comes in waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the water is calm, and sometimes it's overwhelming. All we can do is learn to swim. So, denial of hearing loss, it affects families too. So, Sue was telling me about her upbringing as a hard of hearing person. She's had a hearing loss all her life. And she was talking about how her parents reacted to it. So I asked her to write a letter to her parents that she may never send, and to imagine the response her parents would have given to her had she sent that letter. So let me read you some excerpts from her letter, both letters. Dear Mom and Dad, I hope all is well with you and that Daddy's back feels better. It has taken me a long time to write this letter, about 40 years, because I was afraid you'd be mad or hurt for what I have had to tell you. But I can't, or rather don't want to, hold my feelings and hide myself from you anymore. That has taken too much of a toll from my life. You really don't know me, and you never have. If you only had known the pain I have carried around inside of me, even as a kid. Instead, you saw a little girl with pigtails who loved Turkish taffy, who played in the jungle gym, and who loved blowing bubbles. If only you had known that the little girl had no idea of where she ended and others began. If only you had known how much I tried to please you and Daddy by doing well at school, by not going to my bedroom every Thanksgiving and Christmas, and escape all those people, and by eating at the dinner table, nodding my head, or smiling at strategic points in the conversation, in order to pretend that I could follow it. Please don't blame all this on my ears, because it's not that simple. If I had no legs, you wouldn't force me to jump. If I was blind, you wouldn't force me to drive a car. So why did you force me to hear when I couldn't? And by the way, why did you have the TV on during most every meal anyway? Finally, now at age 41, I know that my pain and my feeling that I had failed you and me, and for that matter, everyone else, wasn't my fault. If only you had known to tell me that. If only you had known to tell yourselves that. If only you had been told. If only. I love you, Sue. This is the letter Sue writes that she wished her parents would have responded. Dear Sue, I can't remember how many nights after you had gone to bed that your father and I have cried for you. I still see you walking by yourself in crowds, looking so cut off from the world. I would tell everyone during family gatherings and even during dinner to speak slowly and clearly, particularly Uncle George, who always mumbled, but it was to no avail. They wouldn't listen. How ironic that I expected you to listen when all those hearing people didn't. You now know that I'm not as tall or as smart or as sensitive or as good as you had hoped and had assumed. And I dare say I also know that myself. I am so, so sorry. The truth is that your hearing loss was so painful to me and Daddy that I pretended you were fine, and I guess we also made you pretend that you were fine with normal hearing. No, I'm not hurt or angry at you for your letter. It took a lot of guts for you to write it. Oh, how I wish we could have been able to talk about this when you had pigtails and kept getting Turkish taffy stuck in your braces. Remember that? If I only could have not hid my helplessness and pain from you and from Daddy, maybe I wouldn't have been so alone, too. I could have hugged you, dear, and cried with you, and afterwards could have made that favorite meatball dish that you like so much. The pain, rage, and denial that we both fell victim to wasn't because of your ears. If only I had known not to let your hearing loss pollute your life and mine. It didn't have to be this way. If only I had known what to do. If only somebody had told me. I'm sorry. I love you. Love, Mom and Dad. Okay, so let's move on. This was a fascinating experience I had. I had a woman of a hard of hearing man come to my office who started the conversation saying how great their marriage had become when her husband finally got hearing aids. And she went on and on how we were able to go places, go to lectures, we've had parties, et cetera, et cetera. She was thrilled. And then finally I asked her, well, how can I help it? Sounds like things are going very well. And she talked about her husband becoming quite depressed because of how happy he had finally become. What I don't get it, I said. And she educated me about grieving for lost time. Her husband became depressed because why didn't I do this sooner? Why didn't I get hearing aids a long time ago and not wasted all this time? So this is an interesting phenomenon of grieving. So we can talk about identity for a few minutes. We're all multiple things, right? And if anyone wants a reference for this, it's the ecological theory of identity. Many people obviously have cochlear implants. This is an interesting quote from Deb Hagner. Her identity is I'm mechanically deaf. Many of you, I suspect, are familiar with the Facebook group Hearing Loss Community. It's a fabulous group, a support group. Having a cochlear implant creates those robotic beeps and whirling noises that my brain is struggling to make sense out of. It will take lots of time to do so, but there is sound. I will always be deaf at the end of the day. If a battery dies when I shower, and I'm keeping up with my sign language as well, but this is huge. So what would you like to be called? One person writes, I'm curious as to why some people don't like the term hearing impaired. I prefer it to hard of hearing, as I don't feel that gets the point across effectively. You should call yourself what you want and ignore anyone who says differently. It isn't their business. Just respect what others prefer for themselves. I use hard of hearing or deaf, but if you prefer hearing impaired, I would 100% respect that. I'm not a teenager, I'm a pre-adult. One aspect of identity is how much a person experiences what's called spread. Let me explain to you what that means with a couple of examples. What do you notice about this picture from a 5-year-old? The ears are very, very big, right? So you can imagine that that 5-year-old viewed himself as sort of one big blob of hearing loss, or the 55-year-old who said, because of my hearing loss, there's no way I'm going to make it in this hearing world. Contrast that with a low degree of spread. I've learned ways to cope with my hearing loss in order to be successful. Al Pimentel was the director of the National Institute of the Deaf. The only thing deaf people cannot do is hear. Being hard of hearing is an integral part of my character, but I'm much more than that. Now, Paul Smith, who, by the way, gave you permission to tell the whole story using his name, was a middle-aged man who had a very successful sales practice, all of a sudden lost his hearing and became quite depressed, in fact, suicidal. Comes to my office, the only thing he would want to talk about that session was his anger and rage about being stuck in traffic. Now, I ask you, what on earth do you think that has to do with hearing loss? Some of you may be thinking, I'm guessing here, that it has to do with no matter how hard he tried in that traffic jam to move, he couldn't. No matter how hard he tried to understand people's communication, parties, and at group gatherings, he couldn't. He felt so helpless and stuck. Everything was becoming too bloody difficult. Seemingly a life ago, he was always on the go of meeting new people. He was a poster child for extroversion, but all too insidiously, his joie de vivre became subjugated by a dread of leaving the solitude of his home. So I asked him to take 7 cups and beans and put a number of beans in each cup according to what his values were in life. Could be anything, any of these things. He put 5 beans in the social cup, 3 in the family cup, 4 in the sales cup, and a lot of beans at parties. Okay? Parties were quite important to him. Then one day he just mentioned to me on the side note that he took up amateur photography, and in fact had won several competitions. So I asked him to bring in a photo that depicted how he felt as a person who lost his hearing, as a deafened individual. What do people see in this photo? Some people see the solitary of one tree, the road, the fog, And what do you think he named it? Oops. I can't see, I can't get the, he named it Lost in the Fog. Here we go. It's one of my favorite photos in my office. He gave it to me as a gift. So as he was talking about that photo and talking about his hobby, I wasn't quite paying attention to what he was saying because my mind was somewhere else. And he finally asked me, Mike, where are you? And I said, I'm sorry, Paul, I was daydreaming about giving an upcoming lecture, a keynote speech for ALDA, Association of Late Deaf and Adults. I was imagining that I had your photo on the PowerPoint talking about the psychology of hearing loss, and you and I would then present the meaning of the photo to the audience. And that's exactly what we did. And he, in fact, met the first people with hearing loss he's ever met in his life. And I asked him if he's changed his cup bean distribution. And he did. He put less in the social cup, more beans in the family cup, kept sales at number 4, eliminated parties, but had 6 beans in the photography cup. So one point in this talk is identity is fluid. It changes. In fact, one definition of identity is how many beans you put in each of your cups. Now, I'm a psychologist. I'm qualified to give psychological advice. I'm not qualified to give financial advice. But imagine this slide with this inserted. If the amount one diversifies our identity portfolio is the extent that we may increase our own resilience. So sometimes one's identity is catalyzed by something bad happening. We were walking through a park when a small group of friendly-looking guys started following us. One guy approached me and asked me something while another guy approached my best friend. I, being friendly, nodded affirmatively to something I didn't understand. He then grabbed my hand and attempted to drag me to some nearby bushes. The guys took off, but I got scared enough where I had to examine how my denial put me in a dangerous situation. This sparked the beginning of the process of accepting my hearing loss. This is the documentary that many people know of by Sherry Eberts from We Hear You. I suspect many of you can relate to this cartoon. And many of you can relate to this dream, perhaps. So this is a recurring dream that Jill had. She had been had a hearing loss for several decades. She dreamt that she was in a supermarket and every item in the supermarket were wearing, I'm sorry, I screwed this up. Her dream was that she walked outside her house and everybody she met were Trivial Pursuit cards. And she had to guess the answer to every Trivial Pursuit card or she'd get killed. And she came to understand the meaning of that dream as she was so terrified of missing information that it felt like the end of the world to her because she can't overhear conversations. And then she had another dream that everybody in the supermarket, including the paper goods, and vegetables were wearing hearing aids. She wasn't alone anymore. Part of what I've come to realize hearing stories from people with hearing loss for the last 45 years is what I have come to call ordinary evil. Ordinary evil is stuff that happens that feels evil, but isn't. It happens so often that it doesn't make the news. Alan Sussman is a deaf professor from Gallaudet University. You can read this. We had a team meeting at work today with 7 people I couldn't hear. They all know that I'm partially deaf, but somehow I ended up being the butt of a joke. And because I couldn't hear them, they thought it was even funnier. So embarrassed and hating my life right now. A response: I had this all my adult life. Hearing loss seems to be the one disability where taking the mick is deemed acceptable. One of my old bosses referred to me as old trumpet ears, and she was a disability awareness officer. You couldn't make this up. This is what Tom Humphreys called audism, A-U-D-I-S-M, the pejorative notion the hearing persons are superior. It's a fancy word for prejudice, discrimination against people with hearing loss. Those of you who are from Boston, who remember the Boston Celtics, remember one of my idols, Bill Russell. He was a black boy, grew up in a white neighborhood in Philadelphia, and one day when he was 5 years old, he went out to practice basketball. His mother said to him, Bill, people walking by you may say nasty things about you to your face. Just remember, their words mean more about them than about you. So we're talking about anticipatory coping, how to deal with discrimination and oppression. So one also notices acts of kindness. Today, I had to go to my ENT appointment. The tech there was so nice. I told her I had to take my hearing aids out for the x-ray, so when she spoke to me, she tapped my shoulder, spoke louder, and asked if I heard her. I wanted to cry, it was so nice. Now I'm going to sort of tell you a little bit about this. And if anybody wants, by the way, the slide handout or the article about what I'm about to tell you, please email me. We'll put it on the chat. You may already have it before I go. But one very effective form of therapy for people, including those with hearing loss, is CBT. Bad attitude is like a flat tire. If you don't change it, you'll never go anywhere. Okay? So one day I asked people in my practice, what hearing loss, what do you think about yourself about having hearing loss? And I'll give you a sort of some sampling of some of the responses I got in some ways to manage that. I got these responses from people in my practice. If my ears are broken, then my head is too. No matter what I do, no matter how good I may be, I'm still a loser, blah, blah, blah. When people say it doesn't matter, when I ask them to repeat, it means I don't matter. So the idea of CBT is when you have a cognition like this, replace it with something that's more rational. It's like having a conversation in your head. Rebuttal: I have at least 100,001 things that are not working in my body. The only thing that isn't working is my hearing. Other rebuttal: I can choose not to buy into the cognitive distortion. To be worthwhile, a person must be thoroughly competent in everything. Okay? The only thing that doesn't work is my ears. Another common thought is I shouldn't try to join conversations because I'm doomed to failure. This is black or white polarized thinking. Thinking I'm either perfect or a failure. There's no middle ground. If I understand some of the conversation and don't understand other parts, it doesn't constitute a failure per se. One of my favorite words, I also don't need to catastrophize to make this into a disaster. If I'm unable to understand certain things, it'll be frustrating, of course. That makes sense and is rational, but lightning ain't gonna strike me dead. I'm gonna skip over this. I can send it to you. Let's see. Social paranoia. You don't understand things. One thinks the jokes must be about me. When people are laughing in groups, part of me feels they're laughing at me. A lot of times I hear stories of people feeling very intimidated by this and by hearing people who, quote, know more than they do, et cetera, et cetera. And one of a common image what one can learn to use to sort of reduce one's feelings of intimidation is this. Person sitting on a toilet with a banana in his ear. So this is a kind of interesting quote from a woman in the Facebook community. Almost everything I've done in my life has helped prepare me for its challenges of hearing loss. One, being a woman. We are used to working twice as hard as men to succeed in what is still a man's world in many ways. Two, my career involved creating marketing plans for clients. With hearing loss, I apply the same approach. Assess the situation, identify challenges, develop hearing strategies to work around challenges, review results, and think about how to do better the next time. I've always learned to do the best job. You need the best tools. With hearing loss, you need the best technology. One of the first things I realized 2 years ago is I may have a hearing loss, but I am still the same person. Finally, an added bonus is the wonderful friends with hearing loss I've met who have enriched my world, taught me to wear my hearing aids proudly, and made me more empathetic, and appreciative of what is really important in life. This is bedtime reading. Anyone who wants a book, I will tell you in all honesty, I showed my mother my book, Odyssey of Hearing Loss, and I'm sort of waiting in bated breath what she's going to say. Calls me a few days later. First thing I said, Mom, how'd you like my book? Mike, on page 11, there was a grammatical error. So if any one of you buys that book, for God's sakes, read pages 1 through 10, then 12 to the rest of the book, because you avoid the grammatical error. So listen, folks, I've talked for almost 45 minutes, and you've been very kind to listen to this. And now the best part for me anyway is the discussion. So let me stop sharing my screen so we can have a discussion. I would very much welcome questions, comments, stories of your own, and let's begin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Harvey. This was absolutely interesting. I actually identified with some of the things you mentioned as a person who was born with hearing loss. Now, we do have a question here from NUPRN, And they are asking, can the long list of words, columns to place value can be shared again later on?
I don't know how to do that except to send them to you. And I would be, okay, let me type in the chat. How do I do that?
Just go to the far right of your screen and click on the little box that has lines on it.
Okay, I'm going to type my email.
Okay.
It would be my pleasure to send you any slide, or actually all the slides, including that, of course. And just as anything going forward after today, if you have any more questions or comments or stories, please email. This is the most exciting part about what I do, is collaborating with people. So I'd be happy to do that. Send me an email. Ellie, I think, has her hand raised. I think. Somebody raised her hand.
I apologize. I live by a railroad track. I don't know if you can hear it. Do we have any other questions, or does anyone want to raise their hand and ask your question? You can do that too. There is a hand on the bottom of the screen that you can click on.
I think I saw a hand being raised. Okay. Jerry.
There we go. Jerry, go ahead, please. Thank you.
I've got to unmute you. This hit the nail on the head for me. There are so much. I did have a discussion with my husband at one point where he was not understanding, and this was like 10 years into my hearing loss, and he's still mumbling or talking in the other room or doing whatever. And I looked at him and I said, if I were blind, you would not forget that I couldn't understand what you said. And I felt so bad. It hurt my heart after it came out of my mouth, but it was exactly how I felt.
Well, first of all, thank you for that story. I have a couple of. It's a very, very, very common experience. I'm going to tell you another quick story, and then I'm going to respond directly to what you just said. There's a story of a man who was deaf, who had perfect speech, no indications of any hearing impairment. It was in the days that you go to an airport and talk to a ticket teller to get paper tickets. Remember those days? And Dick would say to the person at the airport, "I'm sorry, I'm deaf. You have to face me and speak slowly." "Okay, sir." So he would do so for about 10 seconds. Then the guy gets busy. Then "Excuse me, I told you I'm deaf. You have to," right? Because he had perfect speech, the guy kept forgetting. Finally, what Dick Ted did just wrote back and forth and didn't bother, because then it would make the person not forget so easily. One of the more common stages in almost every marriage, to a greater or lesser extent, is experiences, Walt Disney aside, I love you, we're compatible, we have great this, great that, is the stage of betrayal. Now, it doesn't have to be with a capital B, but gee, I wish my husband would notice that. I wish my wife wouldn't do that. Sort of keep it. It's very natural for a person to, even one who lives with you, particularly if there's no overt reminder, to forget. But at the same time, of course, it's annoying and worthy of discussion. So thank you for that.
Does anyone else have a question for Dr. Harvey?
Or a story.
Or a story? Yeah, you could share something with him. Anyone? If not, I'd like to say something whenever.
I have a question for the audience. And is there any particular part of this you related to, or frankly did not relate to? Because I'm just a storyteller. You have different stories of your own experiences. I'd be curious to hear about that.
Can you repeat that again?
Of course. I told a bunch of stories. I'm curious to hear from people if there was a particular part you related to, or something I said that you really cannot relate to. It's not really your experience. Because again, we're all different.
Can I share just a little bit
Sure.
on what I identified with? When you mentioned the gal that was born with hearing loss, that wrote a letter to her parents.
Yeah.
That was really interesting to me. I have never done that. But there were times where I felt I needed to write a letter to my siblings. I come from a big family. I'm a baby of the family. There's 7 kids. And growing up as the only child in the family with a hearing loss, you can imagine the challenges I had. But what I identified with her writing that letter to her parents. With families, they take it for granted. They don't remember. They know you have a hearing loss, but they don't always remember that, So when they're speaking to you or when they're telling a joke or something and you missed it, this is one line I always hated when I was a kid. Oh, never mind. And so I didn't get what they were talking about, and it really hurt me. I wanted to cry because my siblings were not willing to tell me what they said.
I see a lot of head nods with Teresa's story. Louise, you're nodding your head, right? You have a story about that? Louise, I see you. I can see you. You're nodding your head, no?
I'm sorry, you asked me what now? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I just see a lot of head nods to your story, Teresa.
Yeah, please. Anyone, please jump in here, please. So I'm sure you can identify with that if you have siblings and they were a little indifferent to you at times. I think they just forget. That's really honestly, I think they just forget. But when they realize, oops, and then they try to correct their behavior. But it happens a lot. Anyone else?
Yes, I have a story. I
Great.
am a retired engineer, and many years ago, I started losing my hearing. Being an engineer, I went to Radio Shack. You older people remember that.
Yeah.
And got what's called a night kit, which was basically a little audio amplifier. It was a kit, PC board, printed circuit board. And I soldered it together, and I put it in a cigarette holder box, whatever. Had a little microphone on it, a switch, so forth. This was BC, before computers, so we didn't have earbuds. So I bought a little headphones and put them on, and it worked pretty well. I remember being in a group meeting one time, and I was sitting in an auditorium up near front where I could lip read perhaps the speaker, and someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Follow me." I followed them to a little room in the back where 3 or 4 of my bosses started yelling at me that I was listening to a portable radio and not paying attention, how terrible this was. This irritated me, and when I kind of calmed down a little bit, I took my headphones off and I put them over my loudest detractor, and I said, "I accept your apology."
That's a wonderful story.
There was a stunned silence, and they finally passed the thing around to everybody, decided that I already had made one. No one apologized. I went back to the meeting and continued on. Now, it turns out that this is a bunch of engineers, and I got a bunch of older engineers. I wasn't older then, of course. Came to me and said, "How'd you build this? Where'd you get the kit? How can I make one?" And pretty soon,
I think you're frozen. I can't hear you anymore.
Are you with us, Don? sometimes Google kicks him off because his computer is set up that way. Sometimes it kicks him off and then he has to log back in. Poor guy.
That is a wonderful story. Thank you, Don. Any other comments or questions, please?
Anyone else?
Deb. Deb has her hand raised. Go ahead, Deb. Deb had her hand raised. I can't hear you, Deb. Unmute yourself.
I've been made fun of for the way I talk sometimes. Everybody thinks I'm from the South, but it's because I haven't been able to hear. So I talk slower. And when people say, "Where are you from?" and I'm going, "Indiana," and they're going, "No, that can't be it." So and I don't always know how to pronounce things because you say it phonetically. So they're going, "I don't know what you're saying." And so sometimes it's really embarrassing to me that people take me so wrong.
Yeah. I have a story to tell you in reaction to that. A woman who said the same thing and said, it's just embarrassing. I can't stand it when I talk and people make fun of me, and people must respect me. I have to have people not make fun of me. And what I said to her is the story of a very famous therapist who said, when you start talking like that to yourself, yell at yourself, and I'm going to say this very carefully, don't masturbate in public. MUSTERBATE. People must like me. I must be respected by people. Must. Don't masturbate in public. That's sort of a funny thing you can tell yourself. But of course it's embarrassing. But, don't masturbate in public. Thank you for that, Deb. Other stories or questions or comments, please. From somebody other than Teresa, Jerry, and Deb, and Don, who have already spoken. Let's expand the audience a bit if we could.
Has anyone had a chance to read his books?
Don't read
Don't read,
don't read page 11, whatever you do.
don't read page 11.
Has a horrible, it's like something to do with the direct object or indirect object or something. The him and whatever.
Mamas are great, aren't they?
Yeah.
Anyone else have a story or a comment or anything you'd like to say to Dr. Harvey, please? Okay, I'm checking okay, here we go. Paula.
15 years ago, I was in a program, a peer mentoring program at Gallaudet University, and your book was a textbook in one of the classes there. So that's where I was first introduced to your work and you. And I'm going to have to reread that book. I'm very inspired by what you have presented to us today. And one of the things that I have found is that I have to constantly self-advocate, and be gentle with people because they'll revert back to their patterns of talking fast, not repeating things, not facing me, not communicating effectively with a hard of hearing person. And so I have to be patient too, and forgive others, and forgive myself at times,
Yeah.
so that I can just be able to move on and still enjoy and have a effective and happy life.
Yeah, that's very, very, very profound comment. Thank you. You know, as I hear these stories, I differentiate between, people who mean well but forget and have to be reminded often, and other people, and this is what I call ordinary evil, who know darn well, but they don't really care, and so managing one's anger and frustration and forgiveness is a real important task, isn't it? Real important task. Okay, Paula and Melissa. Okay, I think Melissa's the next one who raised her hand. Melissa?
Okay. I think so I have a really difficult time sometimes trying to manage my emotions when it comes to like dealing with frustration. Because I don't know, because I feel like I deal with them constantly, and like during COVID times, boy, that was really a whole unique experience. Made me realize how much I can't hear because I depended on lip reading, and when that got taken away, I was like, oh my god! And so, but really, I'm kind of struggling with two things. I'm struggling with trying to manage my emotion and frustration with other people, miscommunication, and just all that type of stuff. Because it's constant, it's over and over. And then how do I manage how do I try to keep hope? Because I'm going through a new process and it's not going as well as I want it to be going. And I'm just struggling with that type of stuff.
Yeah. Thank you, Melissa. I'll give you a quick reaction and thought to a very complicated, sort of question. We have two columns in our life. Column A, things we can control, and column B, things we cannot control. And many people find it helpful when they're in situations that they feel frustrated and they cannot control, is just to look forward to be in a situation in which you have full control. So I'll tell you a sort of a weird, funny story that I'm thinking of. I once went to a party with, I was the only non-physician in the whole party of 100 doctors. Very, very, very boring party until, of course, after several hours, they started to drink. And I found myself in a circle of 13 intoxicated gastroenterologists, GI doctors. And one GI doctor said a story that said, and I'll just quote exactly what he said: when patients come in talking about their fecal matter, FECAL, fecal matter, the size and the shape, blah, 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 I cannot interrupt them because that would be rude. So what I do is I listen long enough to make a diagnosis, and then I go skiing. So, again, this is not a simple remedy for everything, but when you're in situations that you cannot control, go somewhere in your head that to a situation you can't control. When I'm in situations that I'm either bored in or I'm frustrated, and I say to myself, I can't wait to the evening when I can go listen to the Grateful Dead. I'm wearing a Grateful Dead shirt, by the way. So that's my way. But that's a very common source of frustration. Thank you. We have a couple more minutes. Any other questions or comments? Well, let me say, I'll get the last word. Maybe Teresa will actually, but I just want to thank you so much. This is, it's a pleasure, number one, talking with all of you and getting some reactions, particularly since I can do it in my slippers. You know, in the old days, we used to have to go in airplanes and airports and dress up in something other than slippers and a t-shirt. Now, I think one person said they're in their pajamas. I'm in my slippers and sweatpants. This has been a pleasure, and I really mean it. Any questions, comments, stories? If you like this, if you want copies of the slides, you have my email. It would be my pleasure to send them to you. So thank you very much.
Well, it is 11:16 my time, 12:15 your time. If anyone would like his email, it is in the chat box, mharvey2000@comcast.net. Thank you so much, Dr. Harvey, for your interesting presentation, informative and also enlightening. I think I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate you spending time with us. And I hope everybody has a great Saturday. And read his books, you guys. Oh, his book is really, really good. Both of them are really good.
But I'm sorry to interrupt. Whatever you do not read page 11.
Okay, we'll take his advice. All right. So thank you so much. If no one has any other questions, it looks like we're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat box, and people were putting their thumbs up as well. So thank you so much.
Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. And I will be emailing you, Dr. Harvey. I have a certificate for you, and then we're mailing out something to you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, take care,
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Beautiful day.